The three-ship formation that descended through Earth's atmosphere carried beings who had evaluated warriors across 47 star systems. They had witnessed Krillian berserkers tear through adamantine with their bare claws, observed Zenthari psionics collapse enemy mines from orbit, and catalogued the combat prowess of species whose very existence was predicated on violence. Today, they expected to meet humanity's apex predator. What they found instead was Lieutenant Maya Chen, asleep at her desk with a coffee mug that read, "World's okayest logistics coordinator." "This cannot be correct," announced Evaluator Prime Vex Thalan, his four eyes scanning the datapad with increasing agitation. The hegemony's translation matrix rendered his words in clipped, bureaucratic standard, though it failed to capture the subtle harmonics of disbelief that rippled through his species' vocal cords. "Our intelligence networks identified this facility as housing your species' most formidable military asset." General Harrison, Earth's liaison for first contact protocols, suppressed what might have been a smirk. "Oh, Maya's formidable, all right. Just last week she managed to requisition 3,000 MREs that were supposed to be delivered to Alpha Centauri. Saved us from eating nutrient paste for a month." The second evaluator, a crystalline being whose name translated roughly to "sharp edge that cuts through deception," flickered with what their species considered profound confusion. "Your translation protocols must be malfunctioning. We requested audience with your greatest warrior, not your sustenance distribution specialist." "Same thing, really," Harrison replied, watching as Maya stirred in her sleep, muttering something about shipping manifests. "You want to see someone who's won battles? Maya's fought procurement departments across 3 sectors and never lost a requisition form." Vex Thalan's primary manipulator appendages twitched, a gesture that, in his species, indicated either extreme frustration or the onset of molting season. "Perhaps there has been a cultural misunderstanding. When we speak of warriors, we refer to individuals trained in the arts of destruction, conquest, and the strategic application of violence." "Right. That's Maya," Harrison said, gesturing towards the sleeping figure. "You should see what she does to budget allocations that don't make sense. Absolute carnage." The third evaluator had been silent until now, a reptilian creature whose species had perfected the art of warfare before humans discovered fire. When she spoke, it was with the measured cadence of someone accustomed to being obeyed across solar systems. "Commander Harrison, we shall be direct. The hegemony conscripts only the finest warriors from each species we encounter. These individuals serve as enforcers of galactic order, their combat prowess ensuring compliance across our territories. We require your most lethal specimen." Maya chose that moment to wake up, blinking owlishly at the assembled aliens before focusing on her computer screen. "Oh, perfect timing. The coffee shipment from Luna Base is running 3 days behind schedule, and someone ordered the wrong type of plasma conduits for the orbital defense platforms. Again." She began typing furiously, completely ignoring the delegation of interstellar military assessors standing 5 feet away. Harrison cleared his throat. "Maya, we have visitors." She looked up, registered the presence of 3 distinctly non-human entities, and nodded politely. "Oh, hello. Are you here about the dilithium crystal shortage? Because I already submitted the requisition forms, but procurement keeps bouncing them back saying we need environmental impact assessments for off-world mining operations. It's bureaucratic nonsense, honestly." Vex Thalan's optical sensors dilated to maximum aperture, the equivalent of a human stare. "You appear remarkably calm for someone meeting representatives of a galactic empire for the first time." Maya shrugged, turning back to her screen. "After dealing with military procurement for 6 years, first contact is honestly less stressful. At least you probably have logical filing systems." She paused, considering. "You do have logical filing systems, right?" Please tell me you don't organize supply chains by committee consensus. The crystalline evaluator's form brightened significantly. Our administrative protocols are maintained by quantum-entangled databases with 99.7% efficiency ratings. Only 99.7? Maya looked genuinely concerned. What's causing the 0.3% loss? Redundancy gaps in your backup systems? Or are you running into processing bottlenecks during peak data transmission periods? Sharp edge that cuts through. Deception flickered rapidly, the equivalent of nervous laughter in their species. How did you? Those are classified operational parameters. Basic optimization principles, Maya replied, already pulling up spreadsheets. Here, look at this. She gestured to her screen, which displayed a mind-numbing array of supply chain data. We've got 17 different suppliers for Class C plasma conduits, but only 3 for Class A conduits, which creates a bottleneck every time we need to upgrade systems. The obvious solution is to consolidate suppliers and renegotiate bulk pricing contracts, but procurement insists on maintaining competitive bidding processes that actually cost us more money and create delays. She was warming to her subject now, completely oblivious to the fact that 3 of the galaxy's most experienced military evaluators were hanging on every word. And don't get me started on inventory management. We're storing 60% more spare parts than we statistically need based on failure rates, but we're chronically short on basic maintenance supplies because someone keeps classifying lubricants as luxury items in the budget. The reptilian evaluator leaned forward, her scales shifting to a pattern that indicated intense focus. You identify systemic inefficiencies through observation? Pattern recognition, mostly, Maya said, pulling up another screen. Everything's connected, right? You can't optimize one part of a system without understanding how it affects everything else. Like these plasma conduits I mentioned? The reason we need so many Class C units is because the power distribution grid was designed by committee. So instead of having a logical hierarchy of power needs, we've got this spaghetti nightmare of redundant systems that all require different specifications. Vex Thalen's manipulation appendages were now twitching so rapidly they resembled hummingbird wings. And you solve these problems? Well, yeah, it's literally my job. Maya finally seemed to notice that the aliens were paying unusual attention to her work. Is this about resource-sharing agreements? Because I have to warn you, if your civilization runs on committee-based decision-making, any trade relationship is going to be a logistical nightmare. General Harrison watched the 3 evaluators exchange what were clearly meaningful glances, though he couldn't interpret the specific meanings. Maya, he said carefully, these representatives are here to evaluate Earth's military capabilities. Oh. Maya looked at the aliens with new interest. In that case, you probably want to talk to someone in strategic command. I just make sure everyone has enough bullets and toilet paper. Though, honestly, the toilet paper is usually harder to source than the ammunition. The crystalline being's form pulsed with what might have been excitement. You coordinate supply logistics for your entire military infrastructure? Just this sector, unfortunately. The other coordinators refuse to use standardized reporting formats, so I can't get real-time data on global supply status. It's incredibly frustrating. Maya pulled up yet another spreadsheet, this one showing resource allocation across multiple bases. Look at this mess. Base 7 orders 60% more medical supplies than they statistically need, but Base 4 is constantly running short on basic wound care materials. The obvious solution is centralized distribution with predictive modeling, but try explaining that to someone who thinks just in case is a valid inventory management strategy. The reptilian evaluator's scales had shifted to a pattern her species associated with profound revelation. Your species employs individuals like you across all military installations? God, I wish, Maya said. Do you know how much money we'd save with proper coordination? But no, everyone wants to maintain their own little fiefdoms instead of thinking systematically. She gestured at her screens with obvious frustration. We could probably cut supply costs by 30% and improve readiness by 40% with basic optimization protocols, but suggesting change around here is like suggesting we abandon gravity. Vexthalon was now vibrating at a frequency that indicated either transcendent understanding or an imminent nervous breakdown. This individual, he announced to his companions, may indeed be exactly what we require. General Harrison raised an eyebrow. Maya? Really? Oh yes, the reptilian evaluator hissed, her scales now displaying the complex patterns her species reserved for moments of strategic importance. Most definitely. Maya, still oblivious to the undercurrents of the conversation, had returned to her work. Well, if you need any help optimizing your supply chains, let me know. But fair warning, most people don't appreciate hearing how inefficient their systems are, even when you can prove it mathematically. The three evaluators exchanged another series of meaningful looks, and Harrison got the distinct impression that Maya Chen's life was about to become significantly more complicated. The hegemony flagship Inevitable Convergence possessed all the aesthetic charm of a weaponized office building, which Maya found oddly comforting. The corridors reminded her of the Pentagon. If the Pentagon had been designed by beings who considered right angles a form of artistic expression and believed that adequate lighting was a sign of weakness. Your quarters are through here, announced her escort, a mid-ranking officer whose name contained 17 syllables and roughly translated to one who ensures compliance through administrative precision. Maya had taken to calling him Clipboard, which he seemed to appreciate as a mark of professional respect. This is quite generous, Maya said, examining the Spartan accommodations. Much better than the visiting officer quarters at Fort Carson. Do you have Wi-Fi? I need to update the quarterly supply projections, and the deadlines tomorrow. Clipboard's antenna twitched in what might have been confusion. You wish to continue your previous duties while participating in our cultural exchange program? Well, someone has to keep track of the requisitions. The replacement shipments won't organize themselves. Maya was already setting up her portable workstation, cables snaking across the alien furniture with practiced efficiency. Besides, trade negotiations are basically large-scale logistics problems, right? Same principles apply. What Maya didn't know, because nobody had bothered to explain it, was that she wasn't here for trade negotiations. The hegemony's standard protocol involved selecting the most effective warrior from each species they encountered, bringing them aboard the flagship for psychological conditioning, and deploying them as enforcers across their territory. The conditioning process typically involved sensory deprivation, controlled nutrition, and carefully calibrated psychological pressure designed to break down resistance and rebuild loyalty to the hegemony. What they got instead was Maya asking if they had better network connectivity in the server rooms. The data transmission rates in this section seem suboptimal, she mentioned to Clipboard during her third day aboard. Are you running everything through centralized processors, or do you have distributed computing clusters? Our computational architecture is classified above your clearance level, Clipboard replied, which was technically true. Maya was supposed to be an indoctrinated enforcer in training, not a systems analyst. Fair enough. But you might want to consider load balancing across multiple nodes. I've been monitoring your internal communications patterns, just from usage patterns, nothing sensitive, and you've got serious bandwidth bottlenecks during peak operational hours. Clipboard made a note on his datapad, which was shaped like a crystalline honeycomb and hummed faintly when activated. You have analyzed our communication efficiency from observation. Basic network theory, Maya replied absently, studying her laptop screen. Information flow follows predictable patterns. When you've got choke points in the system, data backs up and processing times increase exponentially. It's like traffic jams, but for bits and bytes. 2 days later, Maya found herself in conversation with Chief Navigation Officer Keth Vrelix, whose species had perfected interstellar travel before Earth's continents settled into their current configuration. She was explaining why their supply route calculations seemed unnecessarily complicated. "You're mapping courses based on fixed star positions," she said, gesturing at the holographic display that showed shipping lanes across a section of the galaxy. "But stellar drift means your coordinates become less accurate over time, which requires constant recalibration and adds computational overhead to every navigation decision." Keth Vrelix's crystalline carapace shifted through several colors, a physiological response his species exhibited when processing complex new information. "And you propose? What alternative?" "Relative positioning based on gravitational anchor points. Instead of using absolute coordinates, you establish reference frames relative to stable massive objects, black holes, neutron stars, galactic core structures that don't drift significantly over operational timeframes. Your navigation calculations become self-correcting instead of requiring constant manual updates." "That would require extensive modification of our existing systems." Maya shrugged. "Not really. You just need new computational frameworks for the navigation computers. The hardware can stay the same, but the software architecture would be more efficient. Though honestly, your bigger problem is probably inventory management." "Our inventory management?" "For a civilization that spans multiple star systems, your supply chain optimization is surprisingly primitive." Maya pulled up her own analysis, which she'd been working on out of professional curiosity. "You're maintaining massive stockpiles at every major installation, which means you've got trillions of credits tied up in inventory that's just sitting there depreciating. Meanwhile, your distribution timelines are completely unpredictable because you don't have real-time tracking of resource flows." Keth Vrelix's carapace had shifted to a deep amber color that indicated profound concern. How could you possibly know about our resource distribution networks?" "I've been checking the scheduling databases you gave me access to. You said I could review trade manifests as part of the cultural exchange program, remember?" Maya looked genuinely puzzled. "The data patterns are pretty obvious once you start looking for them. Like, why are you shipping Class 7 antimatter containment units to installations that only use Class 4 reactors? And why do you have 6-month stockpiles of medical supplies at military bases, but only 2-week reserves at civilian colonies?" The answer, which nobody was going to explain to Maya, was that the hegemony's expansion strategy relied on keeping their military installations overstocked while maintaining deliberate scarcity at civilian locations. Well-supplied civilian populations had an unfortunate tendency toward independent thinking, while understocked ones focused on survival rather than rebellion. It was a carefully balanced system of oppression, disguised as administrative inefficiency. "Our resource allocation follows protocols established over centuries of expansion," Keth Vrelix said carefully. "Well, your protocols are creating massive inefficiencies," Maya replied. "Here, look at this." She pulled up a visualization that made the navigation officer's carapace shift to a color his species reserved for existential dread. If you reorganized distribution to match actual consumption patterns and established regional supply hubs with predictive modeling, you could reduce overall inventory costs by at least 40% while improving delivery reliability by 60%. And you have specific recommendations? Maya's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just been asked to explain their favorite hobby. "Oh, absolutely. First, you need to implement just-in-time delivery systems for non-critical supplies. Second, Establish automated reorder triggers based on consumption algorithms instead of manual requisitions. Third, create redundant supply routes so that disruptions in one area don't cascade through the entire network. She was pulling up more displays now, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. But the real issue is your data integration. You've got 17 different inventory management systems that don't talk to each other, which means nobody has real-time visibility into system-wide resource status. Fix the data architecture first, and everything else becomes manageable. What Maya was describing, though she couldn't possibly know it, was, complete restructuring of the administrative systems that held the hegemony together. Their empire functioned precisely because information was compartmentalized, resources were inefficiently distributed, and no single person could see the whole picture clearly enough to identify systemic vulnerabilities. Keth Vrelix was quiet for several minutes, his carapace cycling through colors that indicated deep calculation. When he finally spoke, it was with the careful tone of someone realizing they might have made a terrible mistake. These optimizations you propose, they would require significant changes to our operational protocols. Sure, but the efficiency gains would be enormous. Plus, you'd have much better crisis response capabilities. Right now, if something disrupted your primary supply routes, it would take weeks to reroute resources through secondary channels. With proper network redundancy and automated failover systems, you could maintain operational continuity even during major disruptions. Maya saved her work and stretched, apparently satisfied with another productive day of analysis. Anyway, this has been fascinating. I've never seen supply chain challenges on this scale before. When do we start implementing the optimization protocols? Keth Vrelix's carapace had settled into a steady pulse of deep red, the color his species displayed when contemplating actions that might have catastrophic consequences. I will need to consult with my superiors, he said finally. Great. I'll prepare a full presentation with implementation timelines and resource requirements. This is going to be so much more interesting than optimizing ammunition deliveries to lunar outposts. As Maya returned to her quarters to begin preparing what she thought was a trade efficiency proposal, Keth Vrelix remained in the navigation center, staring at the displays she'd created. Somewhere in the distance, alarms were beginning to sound as other departments started receiving reports about the human who was asking very uncomfortable questions about very sensitive systems. The hegemony had conquered 47 star systems using overwhelming force, political manipulation, and carefully maintained administrative chaos. They had never encountered someone who wanted to fix the chaos. The emergency meeting in the Inevitable Convergence's command center had been called at 0300 ship time, which Maya knew because she'd been awake anyway, working on what she'd labeled Preliminary Infrastructure Assessment, Hegemony Administrative Networks. She'd assumed the flashing lights and general scurrying around were just shift changes, possibly related to some kind of military exercise. Fleet Admiral Zorax Prime had not slept in 47 hours. His species could function without rest for extended periods, but the stress hormones flooding his system were beginning to affect his ability to maintain the ceremonial plumage that indicated his rank. "Explain to me," he said to the assembled department heads, his voice carrying harmonics that translated roughly as barely contained homicidal fury, how a single human has managed to identify critical vulnerabilities in systems that have functioned for 3 centuries. Chief Communications Officer Val Sheriff spoke first, her bioluminescent patches dim with exhaustion. She requested access to routine scheduling databases, standard protocol for cultural exchange participants. We had no reason to deny the request. And what did she do with this access? She reorganized our communication routing protocols, without authorization. Val Sheriff's patches flickered nervously. The modifications improved signal efficiency by 32% across all frequencies, But they also created a unified command structure that bypasses our compartmentalized security systems. Zorax Prime's plumage began molting in real time, a physiological response his species exhibited during extreme stress. Meaning any department can now access real-time data from any other department. The information silos we've maintained since the second expansion are gone. Finance Director Keth Mollix raised one of his 6 arms in a gesture that indicated urgent information. It gets worse. She submitted a resource optimization proposal that would consolidate our supply networks. On the surface, it appears to be a cost-saving measure. But implementation would eliminate our ability to maintain artificial scarcity in civilian sectors. The algorithm she's designed would automatically redistribute surplus resources to areas with the greatest need. We could no longer control population compliance through selective rationing. Medical Chief Irtalak unfolded her mantis-like appendages in what her species considered a defensive posture. She's also identified what she calls redundancy failures in our biological weapons containment protocols. She submitted a proposal to redesign our quarantine systems for maximum efficiency. Which would accomplish what, exactly? Complete eradication of our ability to deploy targeted pathogens. Her proposed modifications would create universal containment protocols that make it impossible to selectively expose populations to controlled biological agents. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Zorax Prime's plumage hitting the deck plating. When he spoke again, his voice had acquired the flat, dangerous tone his species used immediately before committing acts of extreme violence. Where is the human now? Engineering Section 7, replied Engineering Chief Thex Carroll. She requested permission to examine our power distribution networks. She said something about obvious load balancing issues affecting operational efficiency. And you granted this permission because her modifications to the communication systems freed up 17% of our processing capacity. We thought she might be able to optimize our power, grids as well. Zorax Prime's remaining plumage stood fully erect, a display his species reserved for moments of absolute rage or imminent death. Get me a direct line to Engineering 7, now! The holographic display materialized, showing Maya bent over a control console, her laptop connected to what appeared to be the primary power distribution interface. She was talking animatedly to engineering technician Vel Roth, who looked like he was having the best day of his professional life. Maya Chen, Zorax Prime said, his translator working overtime to modulate his voice into something resembling diplomatic courtesy. I understand you've been reviewing our power systems. Maya looked up, noticing him for the first time. Oh, hello. You must be the Fleet Admiral. Velroth's been explaining your power distribution architecture, and I have to say, it's fascinating work. Completely wrong, but fascinating. Completely wrong. Well, not wrong exactly, overcomplicated. You're running redundant power conduits to every major system, which seems like good planning until you realize you're actually creating cascade failure points throughout the network. Maya gestured at her screen, which displayed a three-dimensional model of the ship's power grid. Look at this junction here. If it fails, power reroutes through these secondary systems, but the increased load triggers safety shutdowns in 12 other locations. You end up with total system failure from a single component malfunction. Velroth nodded enthusiastically, his optical sensors bright with excitement. She's identified 47 potential cascade points in the primary grid alone. The mathematical elegance of her solutions is extraordinary. And these solutions would... Zorax Prime's voice had acquired the strangled quality of someone trying very hard not to scream. Streamline power distribution across the entire fleet, Maya replied cheerfully. Instead of maintaining these complex redundancy networks that actually make the system more fragile, we implement adaptive load balancing with intelligent failover protocols. Each ship becomes capable of sharing power resources with nearby vessels during emergency situations. What Maya was describing, though she had no way of knowing it, would eliminate the hegemony's ability to disable individual ships that showed signs of rebellion. Their current power systems were designed to allow Central Command to remotely shut down specific vessels, a capability that had proven essential for maintaining discipline across their vast fleet. The really elegant part, Maya continued, warming to her subject, is that the same principles apply to your planetary power grids. I've been analyzing the energy distribution patterns for your major colonial installations, and you're using the same inefficient architecture on a massive scale. Chief of Colonial Operations Hex Variant, who had been quietly hoping to avoid notice during this meeting, suddenly found herself the focus of everyone's attention. What exactly have you discovered about our colonial power systems? Well, you're deliberately underfeeding power to civilian sectors while maintaining massive surplus capacity at military installations. It's creating huge inefficiencies and completely unnecessary infrastructure costs. Maya pulled up another display, this one showing power distribution across an entire star system. Look at this. Colony designation Kepler 442b is operating at 60% of optimal power capacity, while military station Omega 7 has enough surplus energy to power 3 additional colonies. And your recommendation? Integrated power sharing networks with automated distribution algorithms. Instead of maintaining separate power grids for military and civilian installations, you create interconnected systems that automatically route energy to where it's needed most. Military installations get priority during emergency situations, but surplus capacity gets distributed to civilian populations during normal operations. The command center had gone completely silent. What Maya was proposing would eliminate their ability to maintain control through selective power rationing, one of their most effective tools for preventing civilian uprisings. Zorax Prime's voice, when he finally managed to speak, sounded like metal being slowly bent past its breaking point. And how long would implementation of these optimizations require? Oh, that's the beautiful part, Maya said, completely missing the undertones of barely controlled panic in the room. Since I've already modified your communication protocols, the new power management algorithms can be distributed automatically across your entire network. The implementation would be almost instantaneous once we activate the new protocols. Engineering Chief Thex Carroll made a sound that his translator rendered as catastrophic structural failure imminent, which was probably the most accurate translation possible under the circumstances. Maya, Zorax Prime said very carefully, I need you to stop working on these optimizations immediately. Oh, too late for that, Maya replied, hitting a key on her laptop. I already uploaded the new protocols to your central distribution network. The system is implementing the changes now. Across the ship, status displays began flickering as power distribution networks automatically reconfigured themselves. In the distance, similar changes were beginning to cascade through communication relays to other ships in the fleet, and from there to planetary installations across 17 star systems. Maya beamed with professional satisfaction. Isn't it amazing how much more efficient everything becomes when you eliminate unnecessary complexity? Zorax Prime stared at the displays showing system modifications spreading throughout their empire like a virus, and realized that the hegemony's 3-century reign was ending not with conquest or rebellion, but with optimization. The first sign that something had gone catastrophically wrong came 16 hours later, when Maya woke up to find her escort missing, and the corridors filled with beings having what appeared to be very animated discussions in languages her translator couldn't parse. Clipboard, she called, stepping out of her quarters. Is everything all right? The being who answered wasn't Clipboard. but rather a harried-looking individual whose species communicated primarily through color-shifting skin patterns. Currently, those patterns were cycling through what Maya's cultural briefings had described as universal distress signals. "You are the human," they said, their translator crackling with interference. "You are the one who broke everything." Maya blinked. "I'm sorry. Broke what exactly?" "Everything," repeated the being, whose patterns had shifted to something that looked distinctly accusatory. "The supply networks, the communication grids, the administrative hierarchies, everything is working." "Well, yes?" That was sort of the point of the optimization protocols. "No, you don't understand. Everything is working efficiently. Colonies that haven't received adequate medical supplies in decades are suddenly getting surplus shipments. Military commanders are losing their ability to maintain operational security because all their data is being automatically shared with civilian administrators. The economic control mechanisms that have maintained order for centuries have been replaced with algorithms that prioritize actual need over strategic manipulation." Maya was beginning to suspect that she'd misunderstood something fundamental about the situation. "That sounds bad? For us?" "Catastrophic. For the populations we've been governing, they're experiencing the most prosperous period in their recorded history." Before Maya could respond, Fleet Admiral Zorax Prime appeared at the end of the corridor, flanked by what remained of his senior staff. His plumage had been completely molted, giving him the appearance of a very large, very angry bird who'd been through a wind tunnel. "Miss Chen," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested he was operating on stimulants and willpower alone. "We need to discuss the current situation." "Oh, good," Maya said, relieved to see someone in charge. "I was starting to think something had gone wrong with the implementation." "Something has indeed gone wrong," Zorax Prime confirmed. "Specifically, your optimizations have been too successful." Maya followed the group to an observation deck that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding space. What she saw confused her enormously. Dozens of ships that had been moving in tight formation were now scattered across the system, some drifting without power, others moving in seemingly random directions. "Are those ships in distress?" she asked. "In a manner of speaking," replied Chief Communications Officer Val Sherath, whose bioluminescent patches were now completely dark. "They've been automatically redistributed throughout the sector to optimize resource delivery to civilian populations. The algorithms you created determined that maintaining large military formations was an inefficient use of transportation assets." "But that's actually a good thing, right? If there's no active conflict, the ships can be used for logistics and humanitarian aid." The assembled officers exchanged glances that conveyed volumes of information Maya couldn't interpret. Finally, Zorax Prime spoke with the weary tone of someone explaining a fundamental truth to a child. "Miss Chen, the hegemony maintained control over 47 star systems through a carefully balanced combination of military intimidation, resource manipulation, and information control. Your optimizations have eliminated all three mechanisms simultaneously." Maya felt a cold sensation in her stomach that had nothing to do with the ship's artificial gravity. "Are you saying you're not actually a benevolent interstellar alliance focused on trade and cultural exchange?" "We are a conquering empire that has subjugated dozens of civilizations," Zorax Prime replied flatly. "Or rather, we were. Current projections suggest complete governmental collapse within 72 hours. "Oh." Maya sat down heavily on a nearby bench, processing this information. "Oh no, that's really bad." Indeed, planets that haven't communicated directly with each other in centuries now have real-time access to integrated communication networks. Colonial populations that have been kept compliant through artificial scarcity are suddenly receiving surplus resources. Military installations that relied on information compartmentalization to maintain security are now sharing data automatically with civilian administrators. Maya stared out at the chaotic scene in space, watching ships scatter to fulfill delivery schedules that prioritized humanitarian need over strategic control. Can we roll back the changes? Finance Director Keth Mullix made a sound that his translator rendered as bitter laughter. Your algorithms have been copied and distributed across our entire network. Every system in the hegemony is now running optimized protocols that prioritize efficiency and resource sharing over central control. We couldn't reverse the changes even if we destroyed every computer in the fleet. But surely there must be manual overrides, emergency protocols, all of which have been streamlined out of existence by your efficiency algorithms, Val-Sharath observed. The system determined that manual overrides were potential failure points and replaced them with automated processes that can't be easily disabled. Maya buried her face in her hands. I thought I was helping with trade negotiations. Nobody mentioned conquest or subjugation or galactic empires. To be fair, Zorax Prime said, we intended to subject you to psychological conditioning that would have made you a loyal enforcer of our will. The fact that you've accidentally destroyed our empire instead is, from our perspective, a significant deviation from the planned outcome. From their perspective, however, added Medical Chief Irtalak, gesturing toward a communication display showing celebrations on multiple colonial worlds, your accidental revolution has been remarkably well received. Maya looked up from her hands to see footage of beings across dozens of worlds, celebrating what appeared to be the sudden end of centuries of oppression. She watched supply ships arriving at colonies that hadn't seen adequate resources in decades, saw civilian populations gaining access to medical technologies that had been restricted to military use, witnessed the spontaneous formation of interplanetary communication networks that allowed separated families to reconnect across vast distances. This is actually happening, she said quietly. I accidentally ended galactic oppression with spreadsheet optimization. In essence, yes, Zorax Prime confirmed, though I suspect your species would describe it differently. Maya was quiet for several minutes, watching the ongoing collapse of an empire she'd never meant to fight. When she finally spoke, it was with the tone of someone trying to solve one last logistics problem. What happens to you now? To your people, I mean. You can't exactly go back to being conquering overlords. Unknown, Zorax Prime admitted. For the first time in 3 centuries, we'll need to participate in the galaxy as equals rather than masters. It's a disturbing prospect. But not necessarily a bad one, Maya pointed out. Your species obviously has valuable skills and knowledge. Instead of using those capabilities for conquest, you could contribute to actual cooperative development projects. You're suggesting we become productive members of galactic society? Why not? You've got incredible technology, sophisticated organizational capabilities, and now, thanks to the optimized networks, you'll have direct access to collaborative opportunities across multiple star systems. Maya was warming to the subject, her natural problem-solving instincts kicking in despite the circumstances. This could actually work out better for everyone. Zorax Prime's molted appearance somehow managed to convey skepticism. You believe former conquerors can simply integrate into peaceful society? People adapt, Maya said simply. Besides, you'll have plenty of help figuring it out. The communication networks I accidentally created mean you'll be working directly with the populations you used to govern. They'll probably have very strong opinions about how to move forward constructively. 3 days later, Maya found herself back on Earth, sitting in General Harrison's office and trying to explain what had happened during her cultural exchange program. So let me understand this correctly, Harrison said, reviewing her written report. You thought you were attending trade negotiations, but you were actually being recruited as an enforcer for a galactic empire. Instead of being psychologically conditioned into compliance, you accidentally optimized their entire governmental structure out of existence. That's a pretty accurate summary, yes. And the galaxy is now experiencing what the news feeds are calling the Great Redistribution, as resources automatically flow from military stockpiles to civilian populations across multiple star systems. The algorithms prioritize need-based distribution over strategic hoarding, Maya confirmed. It's actually a much more stable system in the long term. Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying the woman who had inadvertently liberated 47 star systems through the application of basic organizational principles. Maya, are you aware that you've accidentally become one of the most significant figures in galactic history? I really hope not, Maya replied earnestly. I just want to get back to managing supply chains, preferably ones that don't involve overthrowing governments. Harrison smiled, sliding a new assignment folder across his desk. In that case, you'll be happy to know that your next project involves optimizing resource distribution for the new Interspecies Cooperative Council. Apparently, they specifically requested the human who understands how to make things work properly. Maya opened the folder and immediately began frowning at the organizational charts inside. Oh no, they're trying to manage resource allocation through committee consensus again, aren't they? I'm afraid so. Maya sighed, already reaching for her laptop. Well, someone's got to fix it. Outside the window, ships from a dozen different species were arriving at Earth's orbital stations, carrying representatives eager to learn about the optimization protocols that had accidentally created the most prosperous period in galactic history. None of them realized that the architect of their liberation was already back to work, grumbling about inefficient filing systems and wondering why nobody ever seemed to think about proper database architecture when designing interstellar governments. Some revolutions, it turned out, were won not with weapons or manifestos, but with spreadsheets and a deep, abiding irritation with administrative inefficiency.